and thanks for tuning in to the Los Angeles Times Emmy Contenders Series. Today we're graced by the presence of Will Truman himself, the 6-time Golden Globe nominee, Emmy winner, and 4-time nominee, Eric McCormack of Will and Grace.
Hi, Michael.
Bye.
Pleasure.
Congratulations on the success of the, I don't want to call it reboot.
I don't know what we're calling it now. I like to think that we're about to start season 11, but we don't really say it that way. We call it season 3 of the revival. Revival sounds a bit religious. I don't know. I can't.
Well, the resurrection? No, maybe that's too religious.
But revival does sound a lot more fun than reboot.
Yeah, it's not rebooted. I mean, you haven't significantly changed.
Not significantly, which was kind of the fun of this particular return.
2 of your best moments this season, I think, are your reaction to Grace reading your letter, finally, and your lip sync of the Leave Britney Alone monologue. And I think those 2 things kind of capture the show, don't they?
Well, they certainly capture Will, that's for sure, and they capture what I think when we're at our best we can do, which is be really hysterical and also really moving. And it's there's a cliche from years gone by of tonight on a very special episode of but we very early on, I think, found a way to not make those moments maudlin or overly cheesy, or worse, not earned. I feel like when we have them, some of my favorite moments on the show between any of the characters are the serious moments.
Well, you could hardly call that not earned after however many years that was.
Right. That is also the other payoff of characters that not only last for a while in television, but actually have aged. That rather than the fear of, can these characters be funny in their late 40s, or it's the opposite proves true, that the weight, the emotional weight that they've gained with each other and the lives that they've led, 10 years of which were off screen, I think brings the show a whole different level of sincerity and seriousness.
I am 100% on the Will and Grace is culturally significant train. I
appreciate that.
I do believe that your show and Ellen and Queer Eye played an actual significant role in increasing familiarity and tolerance for LGBT people among people who didn't have it before. So what's your response when people tell you that? Do you agree?
Well, again, I think I use the word, it's a big word for me, is earned. I think if we'd come out of the gate in '98 going, yeah, we're a must-see TV, sitcom, but we're culturally important. I mean, it wouldn't have lasted 6 weeks.
Right.
What we did was just fit into that scheme of things, that late '90s NBC. They had so many great shows at the time. We kind of snuck in and just did our thing, and we were funny. And eventually, it started to matter to people that we hadn't caused a big stir one way or the other. Right. That Jack and Will, just like other characters on television, and I think that was the subversive thing that we accomplished slowly but surely. And then when the show got into syndication, and suddenly, like every other show that's ever been on at 5:30 on the local channel, difference is we have gay characters, and so your kids are now watching, and your kids get to. So the number of generations that have come up to me just in the last 20 years and said, this helped me, from guys who are now in their 60s to guys who are in their late 30s, to teens coming up saying they've started watching the revival, and it's made their dialogue easier with their parents. I mean, that's kind of amazing.
Yeah, and while you were saying you couldn't come on and say this is going to be a culturally important show, it's a sitcom. It's very funny, and I think that's probably the key to it getting into people's living rooms and staying there for so long.
Well, that's it's the old cliche of more flies with honey than vinegar. I hate to make this comparison, but a huge show for me when I was a kid was All in the Family.
Of course.
And MASH. I would watch those shows with my dad when I'm like 11 and 12, and we're talking about racism and we're talking about war, but we're doing it through comedy. Mm-hmm. And absolutely, it's probably the best delivery service of a message, particularly these days when not everybody, we're getting hit on the head enough daily. So comedy's a nice way to get the message out there.
There were a couple of episodes of those shows you just mentioned that were pretty upsetting to me.
Yeah.
Which brings me to the next thing, which is that Will and Grace is very funny. We were just talking about some of the funny moments, but it's also one of the more in-your-face topical shows on TV, yet it's successful. It keeps going and people keep tuning in.
I mean, like any successful show, it's about tone and balance, you know, and our writers over the years, as have we, you know, you go over the top, you go too far this way, you get silly for a while. But when you find your sweet spot, as we did early on and often through the first run, I think when we came back now and then added age and experience, but also this political landscape that we're in, you can come up with some pretty great episodes. Once in a while, you know, I think of the one where Vanessa Bayer was a baker who refused to bake a Nazi cake, or it was amazing to be topical in our world. You know, we can't do Trump jokes all the time. It's that's not the world these characters live in. They have other lives. They're not politicians, but how politics affects their lives, all four of them, will always be an area that we can play in.
Well, besides associating Karen with Trump is enough of a joke in and of itself.
Yeah, it was a joke to start, and now it's all just terribly sad.
That brings us to our first fan question, actually, of which we have several. A fan whose Twitter handle is Melanka Trump asks if you ever get trolled for your work on the show, especially by people who identify themselves as extremely religious. I
from the beginning, when we kind of prepared for an onslaught of angry letters, it didn't really happen, and now with social media, no, I have not. No one's tried to save my soul on Twitter. I think it's more about it's less the religious side. It's more about the political side. You know, the more outspoken we get individually, or that the show gets, the more Trump trolls will find us.
Yeah. Back to that emotional weight thing that's been gained over time. I like what you're saying about the differences that age makes, that experience really informs the characters in some cool ways. You've been back now for 2 seasons. You've completed the second
Yeah,
season.
we finished before Christmas, actually.
So how do you feel that this version is different, or if there's a way to say that it's better, what's better about it than the original run?
Well, again, that's someone else's call, just like Culturally Important is someone else's call.
For you,
But for me, I have been approached by a lot of someone else's. A lot of people have come up and said, I like it better. It's better. I'm like, really? Okay, I'll take that. And I just have to assume that it has something to do with that, of just, we've lived in these characters for long enough. These writers are all 10 years more experienced than they were when we left the show. Everyone is sort of top of their game. And so there are nights with certain episodes. We did an episode this year where Robert Klein, playing Grace's dad, refused to take my blood transfusion. I don't want gay blood. I mean, it's a privilege to be able to do a funny show about something that is not just topical but specific, very specific to our brand. We have a right and a what's the word I'm looking for? We have to talk about it. That's our arena. So to be able to do that and see the other thing we have now that we didn't have even when we finished was we get to look at Twitter the next day and Instagram and see what people thought and see that how it's affecting people right now. It's a much less slow process, and overnight we can, Grace's Me Too movement episode, the next day there was a lot to say.
Yeah, speaking of that episode, Robert Klein's turning into like the bad news guy, when he shows up, it's going to be something
yes.
sad is coming up.
Dad, don't talk.
Mentioning guests, actually, we have another fan question. This is from Lauren
Yes.
on Twitter. Is there anyone that you'd love to have as a guest on Will and Grace you haven't yet?
That was always an interesting, kind of a golden burden that we had, is that the more famous people that wanted to be on the show, the more NBC said, great, let's do it. And we'd have episodes back in the day where we'd have 3 famous people on the show, and the 4 of us would be like, don't forget to write for the characters. So I always have a very mixed feeling when it comes to that, because my favorite episodes generally involve the 4 of us. And as exciting as it was to have Cher or Michael Douglas or Matt Damon, who were all fantastic, my go-to is never, we need more famous people. But off the top of my head, that said, I love Rachel Brosnahan from Mrs. Maisel.
Okay.
I don't know what she'd play. And I love the girl from Ozark. Is it Julia Warner? Is that the right name?
Garner.
Julia Garner. I don't know what she'd be on Will and Grace, but she's amazing. So I'm more drawn to that, to these great actors I've just discovered.
You mentioned Rachel Brosnahan. I thought she could be like the anti-Grace or something. But with your theater background, I thought for sure you'd throw out like Cherry Jones or Lin-Manuel Miranda or somebody like that.
Well, again, like Lin-Manuel Miranda, worship the guy, right? So it would be great to have him on. He was so great on Curb. But again, what happens is in the course of a season, as we're trying to tell 18 stories, is everything goes over here for an episode because of, oh, look who we have. So I will always welcome wonderful actors on the show. But I've never... You never want it to throw the balance of the stories.
I'm glad you mentioned the writers being 10 years more experienced or however long it is, because I think the writing is really still there. It's still as crisp as it was. Yeah, and there's more of it. Every episode we're like, we are 15 minutes long, but it's hard when you get on a roll, and the characters all have their own lives now. It's not always just an A and a B story, so there's more stories to tell, and we get in front of an audience. And the one thing our writers have always done so unbelievably is they rewrite on the night, not because that failed, but because let's add more to that. Let's build on that. Let's go. That one worked, but let's put in something else so we have 2 that work. And we, the 4 of us, love it. I've always loved it. Our shoot nights are there. I feel like I'm still educating people 20 years later. We really do have an audience, and that audience really is on fire. Like Arsenio Hall, on fire, loud audience that responds when the joke is better than the last joke. They respond, and it's. I look so forward to it. It's not some slog for 7 hours. It is like 3 hours of comedy. And it takes me back to being from the theater. It's always felt, and a lot of that has to do with Jim Burrows, our director, who's directed every single episode. He doesn't let it slow down. He doesn't let it feel like anything other than an event. Which actually leads us to another question from Lauren. Lauren, I saw a bunch on Twitter today. Hi, Lauren. Lauren also wants to know if you're going to do another live episode. That's a great question. I would have thought that we would have by now after 2 seasons, because we all loved them. But that's a lot. It's a lot to set up. It's a big deal. It's not something you do lightly. The whole network has to want it. Everyone's got to want it. But the 2 that we did, I still get a tremendous response about. But we loved them. I mean, it was so exciting. But you're also asking actors that are older now to make no mistakes and remember all of their lines. So that's one of the considerations, I think. Oh, come on. You're going to be on Broadway again in a minute. I'd love it. You mentioned that you get people telling you that sometimes that they prefer the new version of the old. Has there been a fan response that was significant to you that reflected how you feel about the difference between this 10 years later version and the original? I mean, can you see it resonating? With people?
Well, what I thought was interesting, not a specific thing that I can think of, but just that for the first season, when people would approach me in the street, they would, what was the common response was, like you haven't changed a bit, or it's like you didn't go anywhere, it was like it was yesterday, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. They were basically saying it's the same show. And then over the course of the second season, I started to hear more, it's not the same show. It's better, it's deeper. And again, I can only contribute that to we've got less to lose. You know, it's like a second lease at life. It's how, I don't know, if a couple gets divorced and then comes and remarries, what's that like? What's that second time around like? You have the full benefit of hindsight. And I think if there's one thing we all would agree on, it's that, because we always remained friends through the whole 8 years together. But near the end, 7 years, 8 years, you take a lot of things for granted. You take your schedule, the ease of your schedule. You take how good everyone is around you for granted. And sometimes it takes being away from each other for 11 years to come back and appreciate. And I think that's part of what people see on the screen, too.
Oh. Do you still make each other laugh on the set?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, personally, I would rather watch our outtakes than I would, because I know what the episodes are and I know what that story is, but I think our outtakes are hysterical. And in the old days, our original editor, Peter, would put together these gag reels for the rap party that were longer than almost any. They were the length of an episode. And God, they're hysterical. And this year we did the same thing. And I think we're being a little, Max Muchnick, who created the show, puts out a few of them, like a minute's worth every week on Twitter. But it's always just like a little taste, because really I could just watch, it's like home movies to me. And to watch me make Sean laugh, or Sean cracking me up or cracking Deborah up, I love it.
Just to kind of finish off this theme of how different and deeper it seems, it's sort of a thing that the characters haven't changed in significant ways. But there are deeper currents there. Can you nail down how you think Will has evolved?
Well, we finished the original series with the conceit that he was virtually married to Bobby Cannavale and that they had a child. And that I loved how we ended the original series. I loved the flash forward that we did. Spoiler alerts, but we shot it a long time ago. The fact that we showed Will and Grace having not spoken for 10 or 15 years and they see each other at 60 or whatever. But I also knew, as soon as we started to talk about reviving the show, that we had to kind of do away with that, because the magic of that video that we had shot for Hillary's campaign was that the show looked the same. It felt the same. And if we said, yes, except now we have kids, and now that, I don't know that it would have been as successful as it's been. I think the kick of, wow, some things don't change, was the initial draw. And yet, as I've been saying, there's 10 years on these characters, so what has changed? How do we give them that emotional heft and still keep the lightness? And I think for Will, what I've said a few times is that there was a pressure on the show eventually back in the day, because how long do characters in their 30s that are both have successful jobs be roommates and not get married or not find love? So we were forced by episode or season 4 or season 5 to find love. And so Grace got married, and then I married Taye Diggs and unmarried Taye Diggs, and she got divorced. But, it's what you do when you have 8 seasons of a show. But the pressure was always, isn't it pathetic that they would live together for 2? And now to come back, we had to have a new way of looking at it. And the way I looked at it was, they did go off. They did find love. They had 10 years of whatever, and they both found their way back to each other. They both got divorced and didn't have kids. But so there was a new level of saying, isn't this great that love can come and go and relationships can fall, but that key friendship in your life will always be there for you. It seemed not pathetic, but a really strong declaration of the strength of friendship. And so I think what changed about him was less societal fear of, oh my God, I'm defined by my singlehood or my relationship. Same with her. That for at least the beginning of season 1 into season 2, really, we were both okay with just dating, or not dating, or whatever. And I think that was also a thing to say, that these characters of a certain age were not petrified of being alone because they had each other.
That is actually different for TV. You're right about that.
Yeah.
I have another fan question to shoot you.
Sure.
During the interim, you were very busy. Did a lot of things, a lot of stage work. So Sarah, whose handle apparently is Will S. Truman,
How about that?
asks, is there anything you haven't done already in your career that you hope to do?
Well, I'm hoping to create or co-create a show, to be on the ground floor of something that I can have emotional ownership of, a character that started with me. That's something I haven't done yet.
Last thing I'd like to ask you before the lightning round. What you said that when you were in school you intended to become a classical actor and eventually decided it wasn't for you. Why did you decide it wasn't for you?
Well, this is it's a true story. I left my theater school to go into a Shakespeare festival. I was 5 years at the Stratford Festival in Canada. Did 17 shows there in my 20s, and I was very much, all I wanted was to be one of them, to be a classical actor. And as time went on, year after year, and I'd do other things in between seasons, and I started to realize that my real influences, All in the Family, Nash, Cheers, whatever they were, certainly Woody Allen, it was all creeping in to my performance style, and that I really was not cut out to be John Barrymore. There's a wonderful actor named Colin Feore who I understudied him at Stratford in many shows, and Colin was my model of who I should be, and I started to realize I kind of wasn't. And right near the end, at the end of my 5th season, I was called into the new artistic director's office, David William, and he said, "Eric, I don't have an offer for you for next year." I said, "It's okay, David. Maybe it's time I go." He said, "Yes, I think so. Yes, I don't like the way you play lovers. Very modern. I wonder if you've considered television comedy." This was 1989. And I thought, it's not a bad idea. 9 years later, I was doing Will and Grace. So he was not wrong.
All right. Well, it worked out for you.
Yes.
All right. Now here comes the lightning round.
Oh, God.
These are questions we ask of everyone. And if you get any wrong, there's a trapdoor or something.
Fantastic.
What is the last show you binge watched?
I'm in the middle of binge watching Barry. I just finished Ozark.
Barry's awesome.
Barry's awesome. Ozark. Awesome.
Who is going to win the Game of Thrones?
I gotta go Team Jon Snow. I gotta go Jon.
Why? Just because they've established who he really is?
I just think there's no one more noble. He's earned it. He's earned it.
On this show, doesn't that mean he's doomed?
Maybe. Don't rain on my parade, Michael.
All right. Okay, Jon
You
Snow.
saying Jon Snow is doomed? What do you guys know?
Just that he's going to get resurrected again.
Yeah.
Okay. You may have already answered this one. What classic TV show would you have loved to have been on?
As a guest star?
To be a character on?
Probably, I'd have to say Get Smart.
Get Smart, really?
Get Smart was my first real influence, about 4th grade. And I wanted very much to be Don Adams.
Oh, I thought you were going to say MASH.
Could have been, it could have gone, MASH could have gone All in the Family. It would have been one of those.
So you'd be an agent on Get Smart? Or a villain?
Yes. Do you remember the Agent 44? 44 was always in some terrible place, like he was hiding in a cigarette machine or in a barrel. He's always the one that Max would go to and go 44, and he'd come out of a garbage can, 86, and I could do that. I could be hidden in places.
Perfect. Okay, finally, what is the worst job you've ever had, whether acting or not?
Oh, for sure, working the midnight shift at a gas station when I was 17.
What was so bad about it?
I mentioned it was the midnight shift, right? Mm-hmm. I mentioned it was a gas station.
Yeah.
Those two were bad. And then one night, I was working in that cubicle, where you wait for them to hand the money in. And one night, a guy who was crazy high on something came around and started tapping on the glass, like Charles Manson style, just looking in at me with his long hair. And I called the cops, and he disappeared, and then he came back. I couldn't see out the back. I could only see the front of the cubicle, and he came back with a baseball bat and started tapping on the glass and wandering around, which didn't happen at my previous job, Baskin Robbins.
Oh.
That was safer and generally more pleasant.
Fewer baseball bats.
Fewer angry people. I said pralines and cream. That didn't happen.
You've answered all of our questions. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Congratulations on the success of the revival.
Thanks, Michael. It was great fun.
To see this entire interview and other Emmy Contenders chats, please go to latimes.com.